David Katz, everybody.
Yay!
Great to be with you guys.
Yeah, so good to have you in the mix, David Katz. So there's a lot going on with fake electors in that Michigan case, pleading not guilty, the Trump criminal trials. And I wonder if you could somehow prioritize and in some way bring some coherence to everything that's going on legally.
Well, feel free to ask me a lot of questions. We can do like I used to with Pat Thurston. We can do the lightning round. So whatever major or minor news story, let's do it.
Okay.
Well, I think that the most important thing from my perspective is that I'm beginning to be more sanguine about the trial in Washington, D.C. federal court going forward before the November election.
Sanguine is a ding word, and that's a big change for you then. You think that they actually might get this going?
Well, it is the combination of things that have happened here. I think the judge that they've gotten, who is definitely going to stay on top of it, I think that's one big factor. And I think that all the other cases have fallen in line, so nobody is actually taking that January, February time slot. And so that's the one that the special counsel has now asked for. He's asked for January 2nd. As I understand it, when they say trial would start, that would mean jury selection would start. This is a difficult, time-consuming case in which to get a jury from all the prospective jurors to make sure that they're not biased and to make sure they have the time for this trial. I mean, best case scenario, this trial, I think, has to last about a month. There are 3 overlapping conspiracies. There's a lot of potential witnesses. There are issues whether they'll take the 5th, whether they'd still be allowed to take the 5th because they may have waived their rights under the 5th Amendment by testifying either before the grand jury or in other places. And you can't say, you know, I want to talk about the case, I want to talk about the case, and then suddenly say, I want to assert my rights under the 5th. You may have waived them by talking before under oath or not having asserted your 5th Amendment rights. So how those things turn out, you could have Mark Meadows as a witness, you could have Giuliani, or fighting his subpoena, so that's time consuming. You have Professor Eastman, he'll have a lot of arguments why he shouldn't have to testify. And if he does take the stand, think about it. Each one of those will go through and explain why this was a good faith opinion, why they've done research, why, you know, they'll try to exonerate themselves to the extent that they'll inculpate Trump. We'll have to see. Presumably they did some of that in the grand jury. I said before, I don't think any of those people will be charged before Trump is tried because it just adds more defendants. You know, they will have their own reasons to delay. The fact that Trump is the sole defendant in this case is one of the reasons why it really has a chance.
Inculpate, I'll ding. I also wanted to mention that, David, because you're talking about the fact that they didn't name those others, and that's so critical. We were speaking the other day about the fact that the other reason might be that the narratives to which you refer, that is to say, the idea somehow that Giuliani could get on the stand or Eastman could get on the stand and begin to speak about sort of a narrative that Trump wants to get out there, they don't, the prosecutors don't necessarily want those narratives muddying the water. Could you speak to that?
Well, I think those narratives are going to muddy the water. It's just that when one of them has some reason why they're entitled to a delay or some issue that they want to litigate, which is separate from Trump's issues, it won't delay the Trump trial. Where things stand down in the Southern District of Florida, as long as those 3 are all joined for trial as they are right now, one of them has a huge inconvenience or has an issue that they want to litigate while they're joined, that gives Trump the delay that, of course, he's so eager to get. But what would happen when I say the narratives would be time consuming, this is not a short trial, even of Trump alone, because as I said, let's just take Meadows that he's cooperating. They'll go through all the things that happened with Meadows, and then there'll be all the cross-examination. That's just one witness. Then you have Giuliani on there. If Giuliani's really going to take the stand, there's this huge amount of evidence in the case. Remember, they raided his office, they raided his home. He's never seemed to have won a motion over those things. So that will be very time consuming, what happened between him and Giuliani. That's before you get to Professor Eastman. Eastman will explain, as he has in his bar proceedings, wait a second, I'm a lawyer, I'm a professor, I rendered an opinion, I read some cases, I went to the president, I said this is a viable theory. If the former president followed it, didn't follow it, you know, and then this thing about, you know, well, I think the Supreme Court would rule against me eventually 9-0. Believe me, there'll be a lot to be said about that by Professor Eastman. He may not concede that he said it. He may say why he said it, right, et cetera, et cetera. And then you have this Jeffrey Clark. He's another very time-consuming witness. He's going to say that, all the good reasons why he should have been allowed to take over the Justice Department, right? And then you get into all of these Trump loyalists who presumably will testify in Trump's case. I don't think they have anything to lose. They're hoping they're going to be in the new administration, especially more likely if Trump isn't convicted. So all that I'm saying is it's a very long trial. But once it gets started, let's say it really does get started. They pick a jury in January. They start the trial in February. Let's assume it's a 2-month trial. By April 1st, April Fool's Day, you could have our former president found guilty of many, or for all we know, all charges. Then his sentencing is about 2.5 months away. And so the man could stand not only tried, found guilty by a jury, and sentenced by, the summer, by next summer. I mean, it really could happen. And the other thing is that I think you'll have a judge who, generally speaking, will rule for the government, because I think the government will be on firm legal ground. And that means that what's going to happen down in Florida, where the government says this is a disaster, we can't live with this, we have to go to the Court of Appeals and seek a reversal of what this trial judge did. I don't think that will happen, as I think more about it, in Washington, D.C. And that will be another reason why there won't be the kind of delay that I think is going to ensue down in the Southern District of Florida. So for all those reasons, Katz is
you're updating and modifying your original prediction.
Yeah.
But this is, again, just to remind everybody, this is the D.C. case, not the case in Florida, and we'll get to Georgia in a second. Go ahead, Kim.
I have a question about that, though, because the story I read this morning was that the prosecution is asking for trial to begin in January, as you mentioned, but the defense hasn't weighed in on what it wants. So could we see maybe the prosecution wanting a trial date to start in the first month of the year, but we know that the Trump tactic is delay. So could the defense come in and say, well, we're not going to be ready until the summer, or we're not going to be ready until next year? I mean, what guarantee is it that the defense isn't going to get its way on this?
Kim, they'll certainly come in and they'll say that. And with this very Trump-friendly judge down in Florida, she may buy those arguments. Or when push comes to shove and they say, the dog ate my homework, or it took me longer to do this, or it took me longer to do that, which are very viable reasons. I'm not poo-pooing them all. It's just because if it were the normal defense attorney, I would say, of course, it took the government 2-3 years to prepare this case, even though we all saw it, on January 6th, a lot of it, and in the days before and after January 6th, we saw it in real time with our own eyes. Trump saw it too. Why does he need, all this time to get prepared? But I certainly understand why in a normal criminal defense case, a lot of times the government does force the defense to a sort of a rush to judgment. They take years to investigate, which no federal judge seems to supervise or do anything about. And then suddenly the hammer comes down when the ball is in the defense court. And then suddenly all the government's delays become the defense's problem, and the defense is not, cut any slack when they really do have legitimate reasons why they need more time. You also run into the thing where I might be defending somebody. I'm really the person's only lawyer. I have cases like that where I have 1 or 2 lawyers. That's not Trump's problem. Trump can send an army of lawyers. They say he spent $30 or $40 million. So I think what will happen is he'll say exactly what you're saying, Kim. And I think the judge will say, no, you haven't proven it to me. You say that you need, 2 months to do research. How many lawyers do you have on the case? You have 2 lawyers on the case? You're Donald Trump's lawyer. You put 2 lawyers on this motion. Put 4 lawyers on it, okay? But this can get done. This can get done. This other thing can get done. It's not going to take that long. You want 2 months to do it? Do it in 3 weeks. And I want you to come into my court every single week, and I'm going to monitor the progress so that I see that these things really do get done. So if she stays on top of the case, this judge in Washington, D.C., I'm becoming more optimistic that it really can go forward. For this one defendant, not for, as I say, not for a lot of people, it would be really unfair to force them to do that. And of course, the government's narrative is going to be, he's got lots of money, he's got lots of lawyers, he doesn't actually have any other intervening case in which he has to go to trial during this. And if he has political things that he has to do, well, a lot of defendants have things to do. There's defendants who are running around, they're running a business, they're raising kids, they have medical problems, and the judge says 70 days, Speedy Trial Act, 70 days, counselor, 70 days.
It's interesting. The judge that you're talking about in the federal case in Washington is a speeded along, let's keep it moving kind of judge. But obviously, the Trump-appointed judge in Florida is sort of on the other end of that spectrum, it would seem, and that case can be slow walked, it would seem, for a while, right, David? Just to review, that's that situation.
Yes. That case can be slow walked, and it does genuinely have some difficult, thorny issues. And the national security thing lends itself to delay. And her ruling for the defense lends itself to delay because the government does have special privileges to appeal. And so if the government loses something like the motion to suppress, it can appeal immediately to the Court of Appeals, whereas a defense attorney has to just sit there, take all of his or her lumps, and then under what we call the final judgment rule, complain at the very end of the case. Now, to some extent, that will be Trump's situation. When I say that Trump might actually stand sentenced by, let's say, August or September 2024, it doesn't mean that he goes to the pokey. The reality is that generally speaking, white-collar criminal defendants do not. A lot of them are allowed to stay out pending appeal because if they're right on appeal, you can't ever give them the time back, especially if a guy gets a 2-year sentence. He has 2 years to get his appeal perfected. It's kind of a Pyrrhic victory to win your appeal and have already served the time.
Sure.
And so to avoid that problem, unless the person's a flight risk or a clear danger to the community, I know many of your people will say, Donald Trump, that's my definition. He's the picture boy for danger to the community.
Well, he does whip up a crowd. I mean, there's no question. And he does smack talk a lot of people. I mean, he's, you could argue that he's a dangerous, his rhetoric puts a lot of people in danger. You could argue it, and I think it's not, a completely hollow argument.
I'm just saying, as a federal criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor, this is not the sort of case, and Donald Trump's not the sort of person who would be remanded to custody like right at his sentencing. So the reality is that then he would bring his appeal, and his appeal might take a year or two. His appeal might go to the Supreme Court, and who knows, he might actually win a new trial in front of the Supreme Court or won some kind of victory. This is assuming that he doesn't become the president in 2024 and pardon himself.
Yeah. I'm going to run this out also just because you've said it. If he doesn't become the president, he does become the president, everything goes away. We'll get to the Georgia case in a second, but all the federal state cases go away. And all the other cases that are building against his henchmen go away too, Giuliani and Eastman, et cetera. If he doesn't win the presidency, now I want to ask a question that is asked by so many people all the time. So when could you actually see, after all of these appeals to which you've referred exhaust themselves, when could you actually see him held to account in the way that we hold drug dealers and mafiosos, et cetera, to account? When might that timeline actually end for him, the delays?
Well, the one where he's likely to have a sentence imposed first, I think, is the DC federal case. We're just talking about the federal cases right now. So he does not win, or some ally of his doesn't win, and they don't either pardon him and his cohorts or just tell the attorney general, I'm the president, unitary executive, stop prosecuting, drop the case, don't defend the motions. So one of those ways he wouldn't be held to account. A Democrat wins in 2024, he is held to account. I don't know, his appeal could last maybe 2 years, including go up to the Supreme Court, or the Supreme Court could turn it down if they didn't think there was an issue that merited review by the Supreme Court. So he could have the sentence imposed and actually start in about 2 years. If he's not the president, it's very likely that he would try to make a deal. He would say, I'll drop all of my appeals in the federal cases in exchange for, I'll be home on electronic bracelet at Mar-a-Lago. He'll be like Martha Stewart. Remember when Martha Stewart was on home detention and people said, my God, look at the size of that home. What kind of punishment is that?
Yeah.
Look at the size of that home. It's like an English lord's hunting preserve.
So no orange jumpsuit. That's what you're saying.
Unlikely an orange jumpsuit. And there are really issues. I mean, putting aside, drollness of it, the parody of it. It's a really bad situation if Trump is actually in jail and attacked or something like that happens. So the reality, and his Secret Service, I mean, there's these jokes that he would either be in, he'd either go to Guantanamo. There's a lot of room there. That's the joke. The reality is probably his Secret Service detail would be there. The guy would come in from, 8 to 5, and he'd be the first, and then the next guy would come, and that would be like his cellie. That would be his. That would
become prison guards. Yeah.
Oh my God!
You don't want him
never been anything like this.
Yeah, right.
The people who think we look like a banana republic, and I don't agree with them. But having your ex-president not only in prison but attacked in prison, not a good look. So
Yeah.
I think it's unlikely he'd be in anything approximating a real prison. You know,
That's a
We may
which
not be.
disappointment.
I'd love to talk to you more about the Banana Republic part, particularly in relation to the last to the election, the Gore election, because I felt that was Banana Republic like when they, stop the voting and then the brother is, involved in,
Wait
the
one
ultimate.
second, Mark. Wait one
Yeah.
second.
Okay.
Bush won the only election that counted, 5-4 in the Supreme Court.
There you go.
Clarence Thomas casting the fifth vote. What a great
Yeah.
moment in American history.
I prefer the Walmart parking lots.
Yeah, exactly. Where's my Ginny Thomas?
I would like to thank a great woman named Ginny Thomas.
Yeah, exactly.
God.
She hasn't even been named in all of this, but she was clearly a part of this. She had many communications.
I loved
as
your
when-
headline. Thomas takes the country on a $270,000 ride. I love it.
Yeah, I think that was Kim who came up with
Was
that.
that your
yeah.
coinage? Fantastic.
Yeah.
Before we move on to Georgia, can I just ask one more question about the federal case?
Sure.
Is that okay? So this morning there's news that one of the men, the maintenance man at Mar-a-Lago, who was accused of helping try to delete this federal footage that the government had subpoenaed, his trial is being delayed because he can't find a lawyer. What do you think about that? I mean, is it against the rules for Trump to help his staff member find and then fund the lawyer for this individual? Or is it that no lawyer wants to touch this case with a 10-foot pole?
Trump can fine and fund the lawyer. There's usually a colloquy in court where the defendant is asked, you understand that your defense is being paid for by someone else. Your attorney was found by this person. Are you sure that you're happy with that situation? Because it comes up in federal cases that you might decide to take the case all the way to trial. You might decide to plead guilty, but you might decide to plead guilty and cooperate. You understand, Mr. Defendant, all of the issues that would be raised, and then the federal judge actually goes through in a personal questioning of the defendant. You understand this, you understand that. And a lot of people say, well, no, I guess I feel more comfortable having a different lawyer. We defense attorneys think that sometimes they do that to harass a really good lawyer. They just want, like David Katz, out of the case because they'd rather have somebody else opposing them. And so they have this huge hard time. But actually, it's sort of supported by some Supreme Court authority that they're allowed to do that. And a defendant who really does want to have that lawyer and understands the situation answers, no, I do want that lawyer. I understand I want that lawyer. And so I think that answers part of your question. The other part of your question, if nobody wants to represent him, this is a very interesting case. I mean, somebody who got paid would want to do it. The problem is that Trump is never, ever going to take the chance of paying somebody who's going to take a real independent look at it and say, well, thank you for the $100,000, Donald, but I've had a heart-to-heart talk with this defendant, and I got to tell you, it's really in his best interest. He and I have decided to rat you out. But thank you, Mr. Trump. He is not trying. I mean, neither are big corporations. Big corporations do not want to have their employees represented by people who are that independent either. And so that's sort of a problem with our system. But it costs so much money to defend yourself that someone like those two maintenance workers would either end up with a public defender or funded by Trump. Who else can, or maybe some pro bono? There was the person who gave $10 million to E. Jean Carroll so she could pursue with her lawyers her civil litigation against Trump. There might be somebody who would be willing to fund that lawyer for that maintenance man so that he would have a really independent lawyer. But I think for right now, those people are really under the thumb of Trump. And if you have the low opinion that I have of Trump, Trump may have something on them. It's not like an omerta, but, he had a lot of stuff on Michael Cohen. Remember, one of the reasons that Michael Cohen stayed loyal was that, Trump had something on him. So I don't have I'm purely speculating, but does he have something on those other two? Either is he doing something? Does he have either a carrot that he's giving them or somebody near and dear to them? Or does he have some stick that they know that he'll hit him with if they decide to testify and cooperate against Trump? And of course, the prosecutors will try to think of what that is and see if they can counteract it. So there's kind of that spy versus spy thing going on right now.
I will ding colloquy, and
yes, I'm very unhappy with everything I've heard today on your show.
Okay, well, I will ding colloquy, and I will ding because of the demands from the crowd. I will ding Omerta too. I will ding it. All right. The Fulton County DA, Fannie Willis. Let's go to Georgia now. Okay. Expected to seek more than a dozen indictments when she gets her case going, which is soon. I mean, meaning gets the indictments going, and it's reported she has been eyeing conspiracy and racketeering charges, which would allow her to bring a case against multiple defendants. Can you speak to that?
Well, it'll be interesting if all 10 or 12 of them are indicted together and they're all in the courtroom together. I tried a case years ago. My client was acquitted, and the guy the guy who had no chance of winning at all, he had like the guiltiest person in the room, and the others of us really had a chance of an acquittal. So the guy with the super guilty client, he gets up, closing argument, and he says, "Clowns to the left of me, jokers to the right." You know that line. You all know that line.
Oh, yeah. Stuck in the middle with you. Right.
There you go. There you go. So I imagine that Trump's lawyer will steal that line and look around at Giuliani and Meadows and say something like, "Stuck in the middle with these guys. I don't know how. These are all the lawyers. I'm not a lawyer. They told me I could do this. I make the phone call. Meadows was on the line, this and that and the other thing." His undoing there is that he didn't know he was going to be taped. And so he thought that he could just deny what he said, but that Secretary of State down in Georgia taped it. And then what's totally outrageous is he basically threatened, the way that Trump does, that way he talks like Michael Cohen talked about. You could be in a lot of trouble. You could be criminally in trouble for something like this. When you're the president of the United States, and at least people perceive that you control the attorney general and you control who gets prosecuted and who doesn't in America, whether that's true or not. Trump was, of course, availing himself of that perception in saying you could be in a lot of criminal trouble if you don't go along with my shenanigans. So it seems to me that with everything else that he did too, Trump is absolutely going to be found guilty in that case. He's not going to be able to point the finger or lay it off on other people or say he was following lawyers, because it's his voice. I mean, that's why that case is so devastating. It's his voice. The way he says, "Find me 11,780 votes," it's clear that he means concoct them for me. The count had been done 3 times. It had been redone. It had been certified. He knew very well it was like, commit this election fraud with me. And the good thing about it is it'll go, I think, now after all the other ones. And even if he's president, I think they'll stick to their guns down there in Atlanta, Georgia. And he'll have that huge headache and maybe a conviction down there, even if he is in the White House again after 2024. I know people get scared when I say that. I know people get scared, but he looks like he's on his way to the nomination. I mean, the New York Times says so.
Yeah, he'll certainly be nominated. I mean, it would seem he'll be nominated. Let me ask you about the pardoning that can happen. I know you can't get a presidential pardon if you've been convicted on state charges, but could he get a pardon from the governor?
I actually looked that up because it is interesting. And there's a Republican governor down there. Kemp didn't really go along with him, but he'd get a huge amount of pressure, like Ford did. Come on, let's move forward. Let's pardon the guy. He cannot do that on his own. Kemp, the Republican governor, cannot pardon a Trump if Trump were found guilty down there. There's something called the Georgia Board of Pardons. I also looked at whether he could commute the sentence. In other words, say, well, you stand convicted, I can't pardon you, but I'm wiping out all of your jail time. I'm commuting your sentence to no jail time. He can't do that either. So there's this board down there. Now, you could say that if you did it for all, you could stack the board with people who would vote in Trump's favor. But the reason it really doesn't work is that there's a procedure a little bit like California's. And the idea is that you don't really get pardoned the way the feds do. You get a pardon later on after you've served your sentence. Well, what fun is that after you've served your sentence? Nixon and Trump didn't want after you've served your sentence. They wanted what they wanted, Nixon and Trump.
Oh, it's so great. I love our time. I have to excuse
not
the
yet.
witness.
No,
Okay,
I don't
you
want
have
him
one
to
more?
go.
Oh, what? Yeah.
I'll forfeit my newscast time in order to keep Katz on the air.
Well, the only thing I would ask is about, excuse me, but I would ask about the Michigan fake electors case, because they all pled not guilty. I wonder if you could just speak to that.
Well, it's not usual that a person commits their first crime at 81, but this is the old these are the old
David is really funny today.
They're way outside the criminal demographics. The teenagers. These are whatever the opposite of juvenile delinquent is. So you have all these super old people who are willing to sign whatever and do whatever to try to help Trump get elected. So it seems to me that if they can prove that these people were signing on knowing that they had no imprimatur from the legislature, they had nothing from the governor, even the Republican governors in those states, nobody agreed that they were an elector, even an alternate elector. They just signed on December 14th. And remember, guys, December 14th was a key date. That's the date by which they had to have the certificates. And then the certificates went off to Washington. And really, the election's done. If there are certificates of enough electoral votes, it's really just a transmission thing and then a ministerial counting by the vice president on January 6th. So this guy, Chesbro, the one who's become noticed right now, the one who apparently worked on the Gore campaign too, and knows a lot about kind of how these things work. He said he wrote a memo. The memo's become famous in the last few days. It's been unearthed. And the memo says, you know what, just in case we actually get anywhere with this, we have to get this certification done by December 14th. And he's the one who then made the template. The template went to the 7 swing states. This has solved a lot of the mystery of why they're all look-alike templates and why they did these look-alike things. And what's wrong with all of them and what's potentially criminal is that they knew that they weren't just an alternate that was going to be standing by just in case they won some litigation. On top of that, by December 14th, they hadn't won any litigation. By December 14th, after the election, they'd gone 0 for 60.
Right. I mean, it was clearly a plan. It's just so interesting that they, I wonder if they're going to plead this out somehow. It doesn't look like they're going to, David. At least their initial push is to go all the way to the wall with it.
Well, people do that. A lot of cases settle on the courthouse steps. The immediacy of trial. Some people need to see the jurors actually walking in and sitting, the veneer persons when they walk in.
This is for
you
real.
See them all in the jury box, and then you see them in the court, and then your client says, and you walk over to the prosecutor and say, okay, so what's behind door B? And if it's something that your client can live with, and that's probably what will happen with those folks. Some of them, they may want them to cooperate and see who told them. If they have corroborating testimony that someone said, just sign here, it's absolutely clear we're never going to use this. It's just in the odd event that we win litigation between now, December 14th, we have to have it signed December 14th. So if someone told them a big tale like that, whether it was Chesbro or it was Giuliani or somebody like that, and you have corroboration, of course, you want to have something in writing because the other dude did it or the other dude told me to do it. If I'm representing Giuliani, which I'm not, you would say, yeah, that's easy to say now. Right? That's easy to say now, but come on, where's the proof that Giuliani really misled them? They're the ones who signed the certificates.
So many moving parts and only more to come,
I have a last question for the witness, if I could.
We are a little behind, but yes, I will permit it.
Okay, so let's go back to Georgia. And the prosecutor in the case, Fannie Willis, I guess Trump put out a campaign ad where he just kind of beats her up verbally.
He calls her a racist and
calls her a racist, says that she had an affair with a gang member, claimed that she served her job during a rise in violent crime in Atlanta. And she's told her staff, listen, you say nothing. You don't respond to it. You don't do anything. Is it because it's an unprofessional look to respond to this type of business? Or is it because she's going to say, I'm going to speak back where it counts, which is in court, and I'm going to wipe the floor with this guy? What do you think her thought process is on that?
Kim, the latter, but she would be playing into his hands if she got into a tit for tat, because he's in a world of hurt. And if she gets into this battle back and forth, he's going to say, see what she said. I want to recuse her. I want somebody else to start the case. And the case does hinge on having her. Can you imagine having somebody else or having a totally different office in Georgia? They send this to some other place that's not Fulton County. Some other county would have to try to get up to speed. So she's got to really keep her powder dry and not get into a fight with him. But it is repulsive, what he put out. And let's all remember that there's credible evidence that he cheated on every single one of his wives. And there's no evidence that Fannie Willis did anything wrong. But, he's willing to burn the forest down,
Sure. As you say, he's up against the wall. He's desperate. So that's exactly what he's doing. I think that's a great way to put it. Burn the forest down. David, so appreciate your expertise. You can hear David, of course, if you listen to BBC Radio in London. Let's bring
Don't
in
go all
David
the way to
Katz
London. You can listen to Mark
update.
Thompson. Don't go all the
That's
way to
right.
London, guys.
Don't go,
I'm right
but if
here
you're
on
in
Thursday.
London, he's always a fun listen, and we love having you here. David, thanks so much. David Katz, everybody. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.